Okay, calm down.
So there's a lot of incidents that we see repeated all the time where in the Western world, whether it's government officials or media or others, they just repeat these slogans. For instance, the most common one, I heard it the other day on the CBS interview with Coates.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And the interviewer, I forget his name.
Tony Dokoupil.
That's it. Well, I'd never heard of him before.
Not much of a journalist.
Well, he said the most outrageous things, and I heard this repeated several times in the last few days, where people would say something like, "These Iranians and Arabs want to destroy the state of Israel."
When I read the book, I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist. And so then I found myself wondering, why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it? Why not detail anything of the first and the second intifada, the cafe bombings, the bus bombings, the little kids blown to bits? And is it because you just don't believe that Israel, in any condition, has a right to exist?
That's totally not true. I mean, 50 years ago, they might have said they wanted to destroy Israel and throw the Jews back to Europe or something like that. But that was in the heat of battle when the crime that Israel committed by taking Palestinian land and throwing the Palestinians out, or half of them, as refugees. But all of these people who are fighting Israel today have also reached the point where they've made the needed concessions that could spark a negotiation to reach a state where the Israeli state lives in recognized sovereignty and security, and the Palestinians get their recognized statehood and security and sovereignty, all negotiated to the satisfaction of both sides. Nobody's imposing anything, and nobody's trying to destroy anybody else, except the Israelis are obviously now trying to destroy any vestige of life in Palestine and Gaza, and who knows what they'll do in the West Bank. And Lebanon and Iran are open questions as well. So we have this rampage of cruel, endless violence against civilians and some targets that are military targets, whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas. But most of the dying is being done by civilians in Lebanon and in Palestine. In Iran, we'll see what comes, if anything more there happens there. So we really are seeing some clarifications of what each side wants and what they are trying to achieve. The Israelis are clearly trying to achieve the full expulsion of the Palestinian population from Palestine, so that it can only be a land where the Jewish people rule. And this was stated in the statement of the present Israeli government, that only Jewish sovereignty reigns in the land of they call it Judea and Samaria. We call it the land of historic Palestine. So this is a struggle that started 100 years ago with Balfour and the British and the UN League of Nations mandate. And it's continuing, and it's getting more intense. And because the people of this region, whether they're Iranians or Arabs, Christians or Muslims, it doesn't matter what they are, they will not silently acquiesce in their own dehumanization and slaughter at the hands of settler colonial extremists who are directly aided and funded and armed by Western colonial powers. It just won't happen. It hasn't happened anywhere in the world. People fight back. Sometimes it takes them a while to figure out how to fight back. And what we're seeing now is this phase where the Arab states have not done anything seriously. and these non-state actors have emerged in their place. And if these non-state actors like Hamas and Hezbollah are battered to the point where they can't make any resistance moves against Israel militarily, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I do know that people are not going to roll over and play dead or surrender, because that's not because they're Palestinians or Arabs, because they're human beings. And the Israelis should know this, because they, being the state of the Jewish people, as they call themselves, they should know this better, because the Jewish people historically are one of the most dramatic examples of how subjugated people who are denied their rights resist and fight back. And sometimes it takes them a couple of thousand years to come back and fight. And this is what the Jewish people did after they fought in Masada and lost and were thrown out by the Romans. They came back in the late 19th century and 20th century, and when they were mistreated by the Russians and racist white Christian Europeans and North Americans, when they were asking to leave Eastern Europe and go live in Great Britain and the United States, and Great Britain and the United States passed laws to prohibit Jews coming into the country because they didn't want them, because these were anti-Semitic, white, racist, apartheid-loving imperial lands. And so the consequence is what we're seeing today. I'm shocked that the Jewish people, or the Jews of Israel, I can't speak of all Jews, but that the Jews of Israel who in the government would be acting with such cruelty and excessive military assault on mostly civilian populations. It's a real shock, and it'll have consequences.
Right. Going back to the idea of double standards, U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield at the UN, she said, Iran's actions sought to cause significant death in Israel. It's time to condemn Iran for this unprovoked attack. I don't even know where to begin with that, but what's your response to the way she's describing this unprovoked attack?
So this is typical that the Israelis and American officials and others in the West will say, well, the Iranians just attacked Israel with no reason. Israel was, being peace-loving and was just protecting itself. But it's not correct. The Israelis have killed scientists and officials in Iran for years. They recently killed some in Lebanon. They killed some in Syria. And they assassinated the Hamas leader Haniyeh in Iran. And they've constantly threatened Iran with attacks against its nuclear facilities. Then they pushed the Americans to sanction them, to attack them, to whatever. So it's not unprovoked. You can argue whether it was proportionally acceptable, or was it excessive, or you can argue about the nature of the attack, but it certainly was provoked by the way that Israel and the U.S., because it's become really they're a joint venture. They work together. And one of the things they work on is blaming Iran for all the bad things in the region, and all the threats against Israel originate in Iran, which is not very convincing. But a lot of the things the Israelis say are not convincing for people who are knowledgeable, but for people who are not knowledgeable of the region, what they're saying sounds, pretty reasonable. But the Israelis have to understand that the world, especially the Western world, especially the United States, is changing in terms of what people know about the Middle East, what they see on social media, what they see in alternative and progressive media. There's lots of truths and realities, and especially documented with films, that show what Israel is doing. And that's what people are starting to respond to by calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and calling for a suspension of American military aid to Israel, because the aid is being used to deny people their rights and in a way that's against American law. So these kinds of accusations by the American ambassador at the UN are not very serious. They're farcical, but they pass for normal standard operating procedures in an imperial power like the United States that totally agrees with what the Israel is doing and is very happy to see the Palestinians mass slaughtered. Uh, the U.S. The only conclusion you can draw by looking at the Biden response and the British response and the Germans a little bit is that they're perfectly happy with this. What Biden says that they should reduce the civilian casualties, or they should really make a ceasefire to exchange prisoners and hostages. That's totally insincere and totally contradicted by the actual policies of the United States in what it's doing. So you can't really put any credence in what any American official says about the Middle East. I mean, that's a pretty strong statement, but it's based on what we see happening.